Hello everybody, good afternoon. My name's Sam Leach. I'm chairing the final event of the Festival of Ideas, which is, if in a kind of Glastonbury context, we're maybe the headliners of the whole show. Well, at least that's what we're pretending to ourselves anyway. Yeah, my name's Sam Leach. I wear several hats in life. One is as a director and founder of Spark York CIC, based just around the corner on Piccadilly. My specific remit is finance and development, which isn't very exciting. I also sit on the York and North Yorkshire Combined Authorities Mayor's Business Board and have been chairing the Community Wealth Building Commission, which obviously this event links to. Before I go into any great detail, I'm just going to mention the housekeeping, which in the very unlikely event, I'm told, of an emergency, please follow the steward's instructions and evacuate via the closest available exit, which I suppose could be, we'll find out, I think is the way. And obviously, if you can put your phones on silent, that would be great as well. A couple of thank yous before we get going. This session, as I'm sure you're aware, is part of the Festival Focus series, Mapping Wealth, Ownership and Place, presented in partnership with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So thank you, JRF, for supporting this strand of the festival. And if you've grabbed anything to eat before you've come, the baklava has been provided by Yahala Matam CIC, which is based at City Church in the Citadel on Gillygate. Rob Ainsworth, who founded that, is an incredible social enterprise whose mission is to give opportunity, build confidence and restore dignity in the lives of refugees and asylum seekers in York through a pop-up restaurant, street food stand, catering business and a cookery school. So Rob's done amazing work supporting people from Afghanistan, Eritrea, Guinea, Iran and Ukraine as well. And it's a wonderful example. We've had slightly more food backstage, which I'm not going to dwell on as much. That's the first thing you need to know about community wealth building, that the green room has got nice food that we've all enjoyed. Finally, this session is being recorded for the festival's Watch Again channel. You can see that again. So I will be referencing the Community Wealth Building Commission's report. That hasn't been released yet. It's going to be released in July, so there'll be some reference to what that is and what it's been trying to do, although it's not in the public domain yet. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about the themes, ambitions and direction of travel rather than the specific recommendations around community wealth building. We have got a fourth panellist who's going to be joining us. He was stuck on the M62. That's Councillor Matthew Brown. He's the leader of Preston City Council. So we'll all look at him when he walks in and just drop to silence to make him feel as uncomfortable as possible. Now he's on the right side of the Pennines. But Matthew's a senior fellow for the promotion of community wealth building in the UK at the Democracy Collaborative. He's been widely credited as the driving force behind the Preston model, an economic strategy at the city and county level that presents a comprehensive, interlinked approach to community wealth building as a practical and transformative alternative to austerity and disinvestment. First elected to represent the Tulketh ward in 2002, Matthew subsequently took on portfolios that included community engagement, inclusion, social justice and policy initiatives, leading to his election in 2018 as council leader and also as a position as an advisor to Labour Party's Community Wealth Building Unit. So Matthew will be joining us shortly. Sarah Evans joins us. She's the Associate Director of Regional Economics and the Wales lead at the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, that's CLES. Sarah leads CLES's work in Wales alongside managing other projects across the UK and Ireland, and her areas of specialism include social economy development, social value, and the development of anchor networks. We've been very lucky that Sarah has been leading a number of projects in York and North Yorkshire, including mapping the region's social economy, supporting the Mayoral Commission on Community Wealth Building, delivering Trailblazer-funded work to review the role of anchor institutions and good work. And Sarah has contributed to several government task and finish groups, including the Business Wales Task and Finish Group, and is currently a member of the Irish Government's Working Group on Social Procurement. So welcome, Sarah. Sorry, I'm getting too excited, I'm sorry. Martin O'Neill, not the Celtic manager, although he does like Celtic, is a professor of political philosophy at the University of York, where he has taught since 2010. Martin works on a number of issues at the intersection of political philosophy, political economy and public policy. He is the co-author with Joe Guinan of The Case for Community Wealth Building, published by Polity Press in 2019, and from 2025 to 2026 has also served as a member of Mayor David Scaith's Community Wealth Building Commission for York and North Yorkshire. Martin is also a member of the trustee board of the Democracy Collaborative, a think and do tank based in Washington, DC, which works on different models for building a more democratic economy. And in 2026, he was elected as a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences. And finally, last but definitely not least, is Sue Williamson. Sue is CEO and founder of Tanghall Smart, which she established in 2014, and also CEO of Tanghall Employment CIO, a charity set up in 2023 to support people disadvantaged by disability or homelessness into employment. Before founding Tanghall Smart, Sue spent 20 years as a teacher specialising in music and English at Burnholme Community College, taking on roles including Special Educational Needs Coordinator and Equalities Officer. She's also Director and Chair of the York Social Enterprise Coalition. Sue has a particular interest in research, with specialisms in participant voice, inclusion and the social model of disability and emancipatory research, and is currently Joint Project Lead alongside Kieran Train, the Pro Vice-Chancellor at the University of York, on the York Homelessness Partnership Project. Having sat and watched the event at the back, I'm trying to, we can kind of stand up when we speak just so that everyone can see us in the room. I suppose before we get into this and the discussion, it's going to be a slightly different format from the previous conversation. Rather than having sections of presentations, we're going to try and have more panel discussion and also more opportunity for questions and engagement from the audience. But I wanted to just start by giving a little bit of background on community wealth building and on the Commission, since that's the lens for today's conversation. The first question is going to ask for specific definitions from the panellists, so I'm not going to give too much away. But community wealth building is, in essence, about a simple question: who owns, controls, and benefits from the wealth generated in a place? And rather than relying on attracting outside investment that doesn't often stick around, it focuses on the wealth that's already here, the spending power of big local institutions, land and assets, the way people are employed and paid, and how savings and pension funds are invested, and asks how more of that can circulate locally and benefit local people. The most well-known example, which soon we'll hear about, I'm sure, when Matthew arrives, is the Preston model, and I'm sure Matthew's going to share a lot of great insights around Preston and his experiences. But we know this is now becoming a live national conversation, and here in North Yorkshire, the Mayor, David Skaith, appointed a Community Wealth Building Commission, and it's its first of its kind in England. I was asked to chair that, and Sarah advised and supported that. Martin was one of our commissioners, as was Matthew as well. So working with Claire's over the last 9 months, we've taken evidence, and we've got 15 recommendations that are going to go to the Mayor and the Combined Authority, really on how we feel that the region's economy can work better for the people who live in it. And I suppose today's the kind of first more public conversation around that, really. So anyway, that's enough of me waffling on. Eventually Matthew's going to join us. So to kind of kick things off, really, we'll start with you, Martin. Can you kind of define, or how would you define community wealth building, and kind of what drew it to you personally? That would be great to kick us off.
Great.
Just a couple of minutes would be fantastic.
So I'll stand up as well, because I came in a little bit late to the previous session. I was sat near the back, and all I could see was kind of a sea of heads and nothing at the front. So I think I'll stand up also. So I guess I've got what might be a slightly idiosyncratic definition of community wealth building that builds into it really the values that I see as central to the whole approach. So I think my way of thinking about community wealth building, and the way of thinking about it that my co-author Joe Guinan and I explore in the book that Sam mentioned, we think of it as an economic development approach that tries to create a more equal and a more democratic economic settlement. And to do that, whether that's in a town level, a city level, the level of a region, a local economy, or whatever it might be. So the thought there is that really there's a simplicity with regard to goal, where the goal is thinking about, if we've got an economic structure, which we're all used to, that's very unequal, where points of power and control are very sort of separate, and where often, the sense is that most people don't have a lot of say or a lot of voice or a lot of power within a local economy. What would an alternative to that look like, where the sense of having a more equal distribution of rewards, a more equal economic outcome, and the sense of having a more democratic distribution of points of power and control, where those two things can be achieved together, and where achieving one can be a precondition and a facilitating condition for creating that other goal as well. So I think our way of thinking about it, those two things are very closely aligned. So there's a simplicity of goal. How do you create a more equal and a more democratic economy? But alongside that, there's a kind of pluralism of different means. So I think often people who become interested in what it would be to have a more equal or a more democratic economy get hung up on one particular big idea. So, you know, you can have people who talk about universal basic income or you know, the 4-day week or whatever other kind of, you know, there's lots of interesting ideas out there for what a different economic settlement might look like. Community wealth building is about actually using a lot of different levers and a lot of different kinds of approach to thinking about how you can achieve that goal of having a more equal and more democratic economy. And it thinks about what can happen both from local authorities, but also from anchor institutions, from universities, from hospitals, from churches, from large organisations like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, from all of the different kinds of institutions that might have a stake in a particular place and an interest in the future of how that place develops, and where, as Sam has indicated, the kinds of different mechanisms that might go across are thinking about employment practices, thinking about procurement practices, thinking about the use of land and assets, thinking about how things are financed and about different models of approaching financing. And really, just for all of those institutions, each in how they act individually and how they relate to one another, to try and think in a more deliberate and a more purposeful way about the way that they affect their local economy over time, and a way in which they can use all of these different kinds of levers, all of these different kinds of things that they're doing to create that more equal and more democratic outcome. So I'll stop at that. That's my account of what we're trying to do when we think about community wealth building.
Thanks, Martin. We're all done, everyone. He's just answered the question. Got nothing. Sue, can we hear from your perspective on how you see community wealth building?
Well,
what drew it to you personally as well? What drew it to you personally?
So I didn't actually know that I was in the business of community wealth building. That wasn't in my head when I set up kind of 13 years ago, Tangle Smart. Nevertheless, you know, at the time, I did know that I was doing certain things. One of which was to be maximising human potential. As Sam said, I'd been a teacher prior to that for 22 years, and well aware of how important it is for people to realise their potential, but also aware of how structural inequalities impact upon a person and can restrict that potential as well. So I'd had that in my head as a thing, and also how sad it is that some people just fall through the cracks. And when I set up Tangle Smart, I had in my head a couple of potential client bases, one of which was adults with a learning disability, because I'd always been haunted at how, at the age of 25, their educational packages seemed to cease, and then what else, you know? And also post-16, students that had struggled in mainstream school. That was another thing that I was concerned about. Then there was homelessness. I mean, all of these things, for various personal reasons, were in my head at the beginning. And then also, in the mix, was the desire to do something that was a sound business, an ethical, sound business. I didn't even know at that point you could get grants for being a CIC or a charity. Free money, who would have known? I just thought you had to kind of rely on your business acumen right from the beginning. So at the very beginning, I was setting up as what I was going to hope one day was going to be a sustainable business that was ethical, that was achieving like kind of huge impacts. And at the start, that was incredibly exciting. You know, what a challenge to go into the unknown and to create something out of nothing. And as time went on, and Tangled Smart grew, and today, I mean, we employ 42 people, all with kind of permanent contracts. Everybody's on the real living wage or more. We've got kind of multiple contracts for local authorities, lots of other trading as well, only 5% grant. Sometimes we have a year where there's no grant funding. So it's a sustainable business. It's employed people with developed capacity, developed wealth in our community. Because that's what it's about, isn't it? It's developing it one relationship at a time. That's how you create a community. And then the rest of it, the other ingredients were the place, because it's an asset. You know, when you've been in a place a long time, you put your roots down. I prefer the word tree to anchor, I have to say. You know, anchor bothers me because once you're anchored, you can't move and you can't really grow, can you? But if you're a tree, you know, you can kind of grow your own tree quite organically, and then there can be other trees that come out of the shoots. So there's things like your roots and the human potential and your reputation, all of that. They're assets, really, helping the business to grow. And today we've grown to such a point that now my interest in community wealth building, it's kind of, I guess, more philosophical. We've got enough growth within the company for me to turn outwards and to look at problems in our city, because we're now kind of part of many communities. Tangle Smart is its own community. We do music, drama, art, dance. We work with multiple people. But we're more than that. We've got an online community. We had our first 1 million views for a video last week, which was really cool. But actually, that means nothing to me. I couldn't actually care less about it. I say it because it matters to some people and they might see it as an indication of something. But we've got multiple communities, communities of homelessness, communities of people that have had lived experience of struggle. And now I'm looking at kind of York and just thinking, you know, there's other things that really keep me awake on a night, other problems like to do with homelessness or employability, and wondering just how those things can be solved and whether I might be able to be a little part of that. So that's me.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Sue. That's brilliant. And finally for now, Sarah, hear your perspective too.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I think Martin and Sue, they've kind of summed it up brilliantly. I don't know quite what I can add, but maybe our role at the Centre for Local Economies, Claire's, we may be a bit of that glue in the middle. Martin's talked very much about those, I like to think of them, those levers, those pillars of community wealth building, which do tend to sit with those, sorry Sue, I'm going to call them anchors, but those what we think of, those traditional, you know, here, City of York Council, the combined authority, that's where some of those powers and those monies coming into the system are sitting. But I think what Sue's described of that building community wealth is also really important. And I think as Claire's, we're starting to hear that a lot more. What is the role that those organisations on the ground are playing that can join those two systems together and make it feel very different? I was talking to Celia from Two Ridings Foundation the other day. Some of you might know it. And she was kind of, community wealth building, it's just about the public sector doing two. But actually, I don't think it is. I think we're changing, really working, particularly with the social economy sector, and hopefully Sam will bring out more about that. But for me, what's really different about community wealth building, I've been working in Belfast this week, probably not the best week to have been working in Belfast, but it really, it's kind of, just what it brings back so many, you know, memories of history for such a lot of people. But they're looking at inclusive growth and they're thinking, what does that mean to a city like Belfast? And, you know, they've been doing some really good stuff, but it's been really dispersed and not joined up, even as, you know, a smallish city council that maybe don't have the responsibilities that some of our councils, things like social care, have and education in other parts of the UK. But what's really landed with them is using this framework of community wealth building, the pillars that Martin talked about, to start to bring things together. How are we buying goods and services? And quite most importantly, who are we buying them from? Are those organisations based here in Belfast? Are they based here in York? Are they social economy organisations? Is that how we want to spend our money? Are we good employers? Who are we employing? Are we paying the real living wage? And what are some of those opportunities, like Sue talked about, of getting people into work, but not only work, into good work? And I think that's where community wealth building has something really different to offer, and it can really help, particularly public sector officers that are maybe getting a bit trapped in the usual way of doing business and head down, start to kind of think out a little bit and start to think, how do we really start to join this together? How do I in procurement work with the team in economy to start, what difference am I making to York, the city of York, but also that wider North Yorkshire? And I think that's what seems really exciting here in York. There's a real buzz about what's going on. You know, there's a lot of you in the room that I've kind of met through various conversations over the last 8 or 9 months, and you're all doing such interesting parts of that ecosystem. But you are part of that wider ecosystem of York and North Yorkshire. And I think there's some real differences there that I think will be really interesting as some of this work starts to unfold a little bit more. I'll leave it there, Sam, and pass on to our next
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. That was great. And Sarah, I'm gonna come straight back to you, actually. I'm going to try and open up the discussion. We'll probably have about half an hour just to talk through some specific themes. But as I say, I'm really keen to try and get out into the audience and hear more questions, really, because I think there'll be so much knowledge in the room as well, not just on this panel. So Sarah, just to set the context a little bit in the nature of your work in York and North Yorkshire, I mean, you've mapped the social economy in York and North Yorkshire, and the numbers are striking. You know, 2.8 billion in turnover, you anticipate. And maybe a lot of people here didn't know the scale of that. Why do you think that is? Is the impact kind of not invisible, but is it? What's lacking in terms of that conveying and being seen as a mainstream part of the economy?
Let's just think about some of those numbers then. £2.8 billion a year contribution of that social economy sector to the economy of York and North Yorkshire, and yet it doesn't really get much of a mention, a bit of a pat on the back within the local growth plan of the economic framework. Of the organisations that are registered, and that's where we get our data from, you know, I think we work out there's about 4,000 organisations across York and North Yorkshire within that social economy. So from that, we're talking that broad VCSE sector. All of you are bringing in different monies in different ways, and about 35,000 people employed in that sector. It's a big sector, but I think, you know, I think that it's never been looked at through that economic lens. When, you know, I've worked for a local authority, I've worked for various parts of Welsh Government, but the third sector, they'll just deliver it. We've never looked at it through that economic heft and what the sector's actually delivering. And I think sometimes, let's be honest, maybe the sector doesn't help itself. Money, you know, Sue talked about their financial model, they're trading, they're bringing in income. Other organisations do you know, rely on that grant funding. And that's just how they've developed as organisations. But there's been a lot of elbows out lately, let's be honest. That grant funding is really, really diminishing. And I think that's brought people into competition rather than collaboration. And I think, you know, particularly you two sitting on those chairs, you're really starting to think in a city like York, what does collaboration look like? How can we have a different conversation with people within City of York Council and within the combined authority about what we're doing? And I'd like to think hopefully we're playing a role in that through some of the work that we've been doing. But I think the sector also needs to be a bit honest with itself. You tend to deal with the crumbs off the table and deliver a bloody good service. And actually, you maybe need to be honest with yourselves and say, we need to be paid fairly for what we're doing. If you want to do business with us, please pay us what should be a going rate. And I feel that conversation needs to be had. But things are moving, I think, in a really good direction here in York, particularly.
Thanks, Sarah. And Sue, I want to bring you straight in on that, if possible. Does that kind of match your experience? And you talked to us in terms of the financial model, a point of social enterprise and the social economy. What kind of, does that match your views on that? Are we seeing growth in the sector? Are we seeing it become more dominant? Or do you feel that it still sits slightly on the fringes?
Yeah, I guess we sit on the fringes a bit. I mean, there's different kinds of social enterprise, aren't there? There's lots and lots of organisations in the third sector. Not all are social enterprises. But I guess you could just argue, if you want to say you're a social enterprise, then you are. I kind of feel that I am the very furthest away you can get to being a capitalist. I'm probably very kind of communistic, but nevertheless, you know, kind of supply and demand. Unfortunately, that's the environment we find ourselves in. So right at the beginning, I didn't know about, you know, like kind of procurement reforms or anything like that. It was like a case of, right, and I've got to compete with the private sector, with the statutory sector, all sorts of organisations. It's a fair competition. I need to be judged on the merits of actually what I'm offering. So I need to have a good product, a good service. I'm going to add some value to it because that's the way you get business anyway. That's a sound thing to do in kind of terms of business. And then when it comes down to it, if my product and my service is good enough, then we'll get the trade. And that was how I set up at the beginning. No special favours for being a social enterprise, because why would anyone pay for that? And particularly, why would anybody pay for that now in what you've just described, an atmosphere where the grant funding is being more and more restricted? I genuinely now, at the point that I'm at, see myself as a collaborator with other organisations because there is enough. As long as I've got enough and my organisation has enough, we don't need to have more and more and more. So it's like a different model in lots of ways. We're collaborators. I mean, I like to work alongside other organisations, but I have to recognise the reality of some people that have their own organisations to run. They haven't got the luxury I have of having like a great kind of senior leadership team that allow me to kind of swan around and do things like this, which is lovely, but also to look at strategy and kind of bring ideas into play and be more philosophical. They have their businesses to run. They can't afford to spend time collaborating on new ventures with other people. So I think it's quite an interesting one, that. I mean, if you're asking about social enterprises like mine, kind of like Sam's, which are kind of businesses, first and foremost, they set up as socially minded businesses with a vision and care a lot about the people that we're dealing with, whether they're employees or whether they're customers or clients, because in my case, I have clients and customers and they're not the same. If you're talking about us, we're okay, aren't we? It's not us. It's like many, many other small organisations or struggling organisations that could do with a hand right now to recognise the fact that they are led by passion. That's an asset. You know, somebody that works like kind of hours that you wouldn't imagine. They don't have holidays. They're trying to get their thing off the ground because they believe in it so much. They're delivering multiple value for what they do. Those people, how do you support those when there's no grant funding or reducing grant funding? I would say, as Sam would say, that it's about collaboration, partnership. It's recognising you need more of a business-like model if you're going to sustain and if you're going to grow. But I'll go back to my first point. I think there's enough for everyone. If you don't try and grab too much wealth, extract, I believe it's called extract, lots of wealth out of it. And if you kind of just recognise you have your own needs and then the needs of your company, and then, do you know what? It's kind of just see what else we've got as a surplus, what else can be funded in the city. So that's what my view on that one is.
Thanks, Sue. Thank you. And Sue, before I bring Matthew in, very warm welcome, Matthew. Just to ask two questions, slightly different, if you could answer them fairly briefly. I want to talk about that collaboration. Clearly you chair the York Social Enterprise Coalition, which is kind of 40 plus social enterprises working together. So you touched on collaboration there. What does genuine collaboration look like? How do we get away from what Sarah said, where there's almost a competitive element? How do we work closer in practice? What does that mean? And the other question I was going to ask you is, you work within Tang Hall, within Burnholme. Some parts of that are some of the highest in deprivation terms in York. Yeah. When you hear things like anchor institutions or procurement reform or these kind of, does that kind of connect with the experience that you're having, or does it feel a little bit removed from the reality? Sorry, two quite different questions there. Right. And then I'll come to Matthew.
You might have to remind me of the first one.
I will do, yeah.
But the second one, quick answer, no, it doesn't connect. There you are. That's that one.
Brilliant.
And
why not?
Why doesn't it connect? Because, I've already said this, procurement reform, I mean, what the hell? I mean, it's like about, you've got to be a good business, you've got to be kind of mindful of where the money is, you have to kind of, recognise you've got to stand on your own 2 feet if you're going to sustain, because like I said before, why would anyone give you a handout? Unless they're kind of really invested in the vision that you are kind of working towards and they've got some spare cash. So that's what I'd say to that.
And specifically in terms of collaboration.
Oh, yeah, that's a nice concept.
Within the social enterprises, what does that look like for you?
Well, it's hard, as I said, because people don't have, they're not rich in time. They're working in their own ventures. But what it looks like to me is being alongside other organisations, maybe modelling a little bit for them and showing that I kind of actually walk what I talk. But it also looks like, because I do have a bit more capacity, for whatever reason, I can now think of, oh, okay, let's take this 10 organisations here and let's get like a contract bid up together for all of this collaborative work, and let's try and get enough business for all these little organisations so we can all kind of increase our social impact, do something a bit different. I think that's collaborative. And then we talk, don't we? I'm not a fan of talking shops, you'll notice. I avoid kind of meetings and networking, and you're very good at it, like working kind of within systems and with people and getting on with people. But I'm not good at that. But I'll collaborate, as in like talk to any individual, and interested in potential, so interested in partnerships, and other people that just want to come up with solutions, because in the time that I have available in my life and going into the future, that's all I want to do. And I don't care if I don't get money for it. I get paid now. I'm getting paid from Tangle Smart. There's enough there. That's all I want, it's enough. So collaboration. If we don't do that, then we can always sung, can't we? That's what I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Sue. That was brilliant. Matthew, really warm welcome here today. When we started the session, we all had a couple of minutes to kind of maybe define what community wealth building meant. So it would be great for you just to give us a couple of minutes talking through what that means for you, and then I've got a lot of follow-up questions, so I'll try and keep it relatively brief on some of those. So I'll pass over to you.
Community wealth building for me, I mean, I'm a politician and obviously involved with Martin in Democracy Collaborative, spreading these ideas across the country and beyond. It is really about the ownership of the economy. That's really important. And I think the key question at every level in society at the moment, who actually owns the economy? Because I was born in the 70s. My dad was from a coal mining background in Wigan. He then moved to Leyland. Luckily, he became a teacher, so a bit more prosperity. But in terms of where we did live, there was British Leyland, for example. So lots of manufacturing industry, 10,000 jobs in that community. And then we had a situation where there was privatisation, deregulation, demutualisation, neoliberal policies, and then whole communities were decimated. And I don't think we managed to catch up with trying to address that. I know there's a debate in the by-election and Andy Burnham's saying similar things, but this goes very deep all the way back to the 1970s for 40 or 50 years. Not that things were perfect back then. I think we're backward in many modern ways of thinking, but I think in terms of the economy and who benefited from the economy, it was much, much better. So obviously I then became a politician some time back, and obviously I was looking for ideas that could benefit my community, and I came to the conclusion that I wasn't going to have an easy life, because easy life would be doing it the way that a lot of other people do it. But I chose a different route because the way, as I said, back from Mrs. Thatcher onwards, that way of doing economics, doing politics was really disadvantaging and impoverishing the people I was privileged to represent. So for community wealth building, for me, it's about obviously around buying local, it's about higher wages, it's land and assets, but crucially, it's about who actually owns the economy. And working people at every level have had so much of that wealth and power taken away. So within Preston, this is why we are setting up a banking alternative, why we are promoting procurement from local businesses, why we are establishing a digital cooperative to provide free broadband and stuff, looking at public housing, community land trust, worker-owned businesses, community energy, So we want a very different kind of system. And the reason we're doing that is not for me to be difficult and cause a lot of controversy. That is actually the least of my motivations. It's really trying to empower those communities and actually give them some wealth and power in an economy that's not worked for them for so long. If you're in the top 1%, things are pretty good. The political system generally works for you. The actual wealth of the 1% has increased, probably doubled in the last 40 or 50 years, whereas the rest of us are really fighting for what's left, and that just has to change. And obviously, you can look at how we can do that in communities, you can look at how you can do that in trade unionism. Even if you're a small business person, you can obviously be very progressive. But community wealth building is really exciting because it doesn't have to be based around a political party. You can start it now. And obviously, Sam, a brilliant chair, and the Commission, brilliant. And obviously, when you do see the ideas that we're going to put forward for community wealth building in York. They are very transformative, and really good to have the Mayor David Scaife as well behind them too. So that's it. Happy to take questions. Do you want me to remain standing?
Yeah, stay standing. Thank
Okay.
you. And we were talking backstage that perhaps in this time we will see the first trillionaire in the US with an equivalent wealth of, I think it's 3% of the GDP, just for, I think we can guess who the person is, and I'm not going to say their name. But, I mean, Matthew, it's really interesting. I mean, I was aware of the Preston model a few years ago and spoke to you at a Good Business Festival over in Liverpool. And Preston is now cited everywhere from Whitehall, and we were very lucky to have you in the commission feeding some of those real-life experiences. And it seemed that it started as a real pragmatic response to, you know, a city centre regeneration project that kind of failed. So often people say this is ideologically driven, but it sounds more that this was a necessity out of need for Preston. Is that a fair summary?
It is. I mean, it is quite radical as well, compared to what we've had, I would say, but it is very common sense too, because obviously we took control as a Labour council in 2011, with my political hat on. We found a situation where there'd been a huge financial crisis, so obviously that was causing a huge recession within the country. There was a situation also where big business wasn't wanting to invest in a diverse working class community like Preston, so there's a huge scheme that we'd put our weight behind for 15 years, dependent on outside investors. That fell through, £1 billion worth scheme. And then also austerity. And again, it hit communities like Preston and the North and places like this a lot more. You know, the cuts to local government and beyond. So you kind of like, I was in this straitjacket, so I wanted to break out of that straitjacket. And to do that, community wealth building is one of the ways of doing it, because local government is also restrained. And I remember, you know, Tony Benn saying, you know, back in the 80s, first Margaret Thatcher went for the trade unions, and very shortly afterwards she went for local government, because local government used to build 3,000 council houses a year. They used to run universities, run schools, they run buses. Local government owned the buses. So we're very restrained in what we can do, but this is why we're putting new institutions like banks and worker-owned businesses and community land trusts and the council delivering commercial activity to get out of those straitjackets. So yeah, it is transformative, but basically if we did things the way we've been doing them before, there'd have been no progress within Preston.
Thanks, Matthew. And you know, you've obviously got to see more about York and North Yorkshire, and we know that it's a very different geography here, 3,000 square miles of urban, rural and coastal communities. So do you think that community wealth building is kind of genuinely scalable to a place in a geographical region like ours?
Yes, definitely. I think Preston is handy because of the size of the city, but we're quite a tiny council compared to, say, the City of York Council, much smaller population. I mean, what you do have here is obviously got the likes of Roundtree hosting the event today, very good, you know, so that's a progressive anchor institution you have, but you've got so many universities, hospitals, you've got a very strong independent business sector here in York, you know, and I think that's the pride of the region. A lot of people, even from my neck of the woods, come here for a day out just to look at the great independent businesses of the city centre. So it's good for community wealth building there. So you've got the public assets and the public institutions to make it big. What you do need, though, and I learned this pretty soon, Sam, is you actually need people in communities to want to do this. So to bring about change, you don't always need a politician. A politician is helpful, but you need people in communities to enact that change. And that's what's also exciting about the Commission. You know, the NHS actually came from coal miners self-organising in Wales because so many of them were dying or being injured in the workplace, and they actually organised a cooperative in Tredegar, and that was a blueprint for the NHS. So change doesn't always come from politicians, and maybe I'm putting myself out of a job for saying that, but, you know, change often does come from communities, and the Labour Party was founded not by politicians, it was founded by trade unions, for example. So, you know, so what I'm excited about is I think you've got a really good infrastructure here. I think it's more fertile than some of the areas that are going towards Brexit and reform, you know, where you don't have some of the institutions and infrastructure that you have here. That's my view anyway.
Thank you, Matthew. It's great to have you with. I'll come to Martin now for a few questions. And Martin, your book was published in 2019, I believe, and that was before quite a few things that have happened since, with COVID, the cost of living crisis, the devolution, and with combined authorities. Does the arguments that you brought forward with Joe, do they feel more or less urgent now? And I suppose, is there anything changed in how you'd kind of make that argument?
Thanks, Sam. So, well, one of the worrying things about getting older is that you think you wrote a book not that long ago, and then a young person tells you that it's 5 years and that this is like a really... So it doesn't seem that long ago to me that we were writing that. But nevertheless, the world has changed. But you're right, Sam. The world has changed a lot in the intervening time, and not necessarily for the better. So I think what I'd say is, in terms of the urgency of these sorts of solutions, I think many of us would think that actually, you know, life hasn't got more comfortable or more straightforward in the 5 or 6 intervening years since the case for community wealth building was published. So really, I suppose when things are going reasonably well, you could think to yourself that using whatever levers you have at the local authority level, thinking about the different institutions in your city to try and create a more equal, more democratic economy, that could look like a nice thing to have when things were otherwise going well. That could look like a worthwhile aspiration. You could always think, well, look, we want to live in a more just rather than a less just society. But I think when we think about the way that the cost of living crisis has really bitten, the way that a lot of people's lives are getting tougher rather than easier, then actually these solutions, they go from being something that would be nice to have or a kind of worthwhile aspiration or something worth trying, and they become much more urgent. They become just a practical necessity, something that we have to do together. Like, I mean, I very much like Matthew's thought of, like, you know, you can't, if there's anything we've learned in the last 5 or 6 years, no one's coming to save us. We can't have an awful lot of faith in national level politicians. If we want our city, our region, whatever it might be, to be more livable, to be better for us and better for our kids, then we've got to think about what institutions do we belong to, what action can we take where we are, and where that just, you know, it's not just a nice aspiration to have, it's sort of something that becomes an absolute practical necessity if we want to have a more livable society and a more livable, equitable economy to be in. So that's one side of it. I suppose another side, Sam, is that actually one thing that is encouraging to some degree, and there's some caveats here, but to some degree that the expansion of democratic possibility that you get with having something like a combined authority, with having now the fact that we elect a mayor who's got a role in, you know, thinking about what the evolution of the economy looks like at the level of a city region or a region and a county, as in the case of York and North Yorkshire. That does mean that there's an extra level, there's an extra point at which some of these levers for affecting change exist. So it gives a bit more capacity to think about ways in which you can make these sort of strategic changes. The caveat there is that obviously the way that the government has set up these institutions, it's very much with the prevailing growth model in mind, right? With a kind of trickle-down neoliberal way of thinking about the benefits of growth. And you'll often hear a way of talking that seems to go along with the creation of combined authorities that's just about growth deals, right? Where everything, and this has been constant, I suppose, if you think about all of the debates in the run-up to the last general election in the UK, growth treated, this abstract measure treated as a kind of social aspiration. But something that looks like growth could be very corrosive, it could be very unequal, it might do a very bad job of taking people's voices or their interests seriously. So I think there's an architecture there now that didn't exist 5 or 6 years ago that gives a certain kind of additional capacity in our democratic system, but we need to be very cautious with it because this thing hasn't really been designed or engineered in a way that makes it straightforwardly something that kind of lends itself to community wealth building. It's something that has to be kind of shaped and used in quite a careful way, as I hope we might see with the implementation of the report on community wealth building in York and North Yorkshire. So I'll stop at that.
Martin, I'll come back to you again.
Stand up again.
Please, some musical statues over here. You talked a bit about democracy. I'm going to come to you in a second, Sarah, but you talked a bit about democracy about democratic ownerships, cooperatives, employee ownership, community assets being central to this. Sometimes the criticism of that is that these democratic structures can be a bit slower, and actually conventional business structures get things done faster, more efficiently. How do you challenge that in this kind of conversation?
Yeah. Good. So I mean, I think we need to take concerns about the possible shortcomings or difficulties of more democratic economic institutions. We need to take those concerns seriously. And we don't do ourselves any favours if we have a sort of utopian sense that a shift towards a more democratic economy, let's say with more cooperatives, more worker-owned businesses, with more kind of employee voice in maybe more traditional forms of businesses as well. We wouldn't do ourselves any favours if we said, oh, well, look, there are no issues here about careful design of governance, or there's no issues about the way that these sorts of institutions might go wrong. So I think we need a sort of sober sense that that getting, kind of treating potential problems seriously and thinking about, how institutions like that might be designed is a problem to which there can be kind of better or worse answers. But what we need to do, I think, Sam, is avoid the thought that actually, a kind of dogmatic belief that somehow traditional, very hierarchical businesses that don't listen to their employees or maybe treat them very badly, that they're magically efficient or make great decisions or operate very well. We can all think, I'm sure, of lots of very hierarchical, traditional, top-down forms of businesses that make terrible decisions. And especially from the perspective, if you're a citizen of a particular city, a particular region, a particular place, a business that has no long-term interest in your location, that might, at the drop of a hat, just for bottom-line reasons, decide to shift their activity somewhere else, or a business that's going to decide for bottom-line reasons to find ways to avoid its tax liabilities, or to treat its workers, to pay them worse, or to make their predictability of their working hours worse. There's lots of business decisions that might be made rapidly, but might be terrible, terrible decisions, for the people that actually live there. So trying to have an economy that actually, embeds more human-scale decision-making can have real advantages for everyone who's involved with that. But I think, overall, what we need a richer ecosystem of different kinds of economic institutions, right? So think of things from the perspective of, a young person finishing school, where, they might think, right, they need to get a job, they need to sort of think about their economic livelihood. There's certain options that just don't really seem on the table. So how would you think about working with some friends to set up a cooperative business, right, or to set up a social enterprise, or whatever it might be? Like that, a lot of those things might just not occur to people, not because they'd be impossible to do, but because that's just not the done thing, it's not the habit, and maybe there isn't the kind of information and the expertise and the encouragement there. So I think there's a huge role for local authorities and for other institutions, just trying to kind of feed through more of a sense of possibility, more of a sense of just communicating expertise to people, and giving people more of a sense that actually the economy can be, all going well, a domain in which we're actually exercising our human agency with other people, doing worthwhile things that are to the benefit of others, and not this domain where we're feeling kind of buffeted and having things done to us and feeling like we don't have any say or any voice. So I think sometimes some of the things that local authorities, that anchor institutions can do, it's just about, it's about expanding a sense of possibility and a sense of agency for people. And that can actually be one of the most important things that they do, I think.
Thank you, Martin. We're going to come to some questions in a second. I'm just going to ask you, Sarah, a couple of follow-up questions before we do that. You've done a lot of work across the UK, across Wales and other regions in terms of how community wealth building can be put into practice. Now, what does this region have that maybe other places don't, and maybe what areas are we potentially missing that have yet to be kind of cracked?
Oh, interesting question, Sam. I think this region has got such a lot happening, and I think the Commission really pulled that out. We've got some of the other commissioners here in the audience, and I think if the combined authority and the two local authorities take some of those recommendations, they can really make things happen and really make things feel very different here. Particularly, you know, we're seeing the combined authority taking responsibility for a lot of money coming into the system now, and a lot of it is with that traditional growth lens, isn't it? You know, that's what we're hearing from our Labour government, isn't it? But how can they make that really work for place and work that for a city like York and that hinterland of North Yorkshire that you've got as well, which is, you know, quite different in its, you know, Nidderdale in its hyper-rural nature, the towns like Scarborough and Whitby. How do we make that investment that's coming in really work for those places? So I think there's a lot there already. I think maybe this conversation feels a little bit newer compared to maybe some of those conversations we've had for Wales for a long time. You know, we've had things like Social Business Wales, which, you know, I used to work for previously, and how that was offering to grow our social economy sector, and our, you know, we had employee ownership as well. So we were more used to maybe those thinking about the roles that that democratic ownership already played. But I think there is a lot happening here. I think it comes back to maybe the foundations of JRF as well. I think that there is something very special here, and I think feels like there's a real catalyst for change. It feels like really good timing to mix things up a bit.
Sure, Sarah, as well, just to build on that, you know, clearly one of the recommendations is going to come out of the Commission is going to be around anchor/tree institutions, depending on how we define it. Now, you know, when you look at that context here, certainly even within the public sector, with the combined authority, the two local authorities, the universities, the hospital trust, you know, you've got close to 30,000 employees within those institutions. So what have you seen, or what do you recommend that can make that real? How can we get these, and you'll have some great insights on this, Matthew, from your context, but how do we get those people around the table and actually start, because it's not all about anchor institutions. A huge amount of this is grassroots work, but certainly for those big anchor institutions, how do we get them together and make this work?
Yeah, and that will be one of the recommendations. And I think in his opening comments, Martin talked about the power there is by bringing those anchors together and starting to think about a system. And that's not to say that anchor work just goes on at that public sector level. You know, here you've got a very vibrant business community, business that have, you know, some have quite a lot of social responsibility that want to be part of that movement and that change as well. But we've also got those really strong, like Sue's organisation and Sam's organisation, those really strong community anchors. And we're particularly seeing that, I think, through work North Yorkshire Council have done. They have a really strong community anchor network already. But let's think about those public sector anchors. I think, you know, let's maybe start small and bring together those organisations you mentioned, start to think about where are there opportunities to shape things like local supply chains, create opportunities to commission services differently and buy things differently, to start to think, what does good work mean to them? You know, that the combined authority isn't real living wage accredited. You know, well, you know, there's somewhere to start, isn't there? So how do we look at some of those policies around assets that will sit probably with City of York and North Yorkshire? How do we look at all of that system together, and where might be those opportunities to take that from just being a talking shop to really making things happen out on the ground? And, you know, we've seen this happen in cities like Birmingham, where, you know, Claire's have been sort of bringing the anchor network together for about the last 5-6 years. And we're seeing a different narrative coming out. You know, they've got a real problem in Birmingham with youth unemployment. It's becoming an apprenticeship-first city. People are doing things differently. In COVID, housing associations were noticing high levels of unemployment from people who've been working in the hospitality sector being made redundant. And the NHS was crying out for roles. People didn't feel they were good enough. That's why they weren't applying for those roles. So we were able to work with them and bring down what could be perceived as those barriers to going to work into some of those public sector places. So, you know, almost guaranteed an interview, you know, maybe know the questions, having that pre-work with people to get them ready for that. And, you know, I think now we've just seen that model's called ICANN. And I think we've seen over 1,000 people back into work in Birmingham through things like that. So for me, it feels like a bit of a no-brainer, Sam. I think this has started, but I guess when the report lands with the Combined Authority, which will be at the beginning of next month, we need to see some action then, don't we? You know, and we need the mayor to play his role. The mayor has brought together this commission, these amazing people with so many different experiences, views, and we've condensed it into a set of 15 recommendations. Let's make it happen. But we need his backing to say, this is what I believe. This is what it was all about. So, yeah, I'd say let's make it happen. That's my ending.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sarah. And yeah, we've covered a lot of ground already, and I think we're lucky with the panel because we've got a politician who's doing it in practice. Sarah's doing some great work across the UK in the kind of architecture of how this can happen. Clearly, Martin, there's a lot of theoretical underpinning and the framework that I suppose has been partly learned in America, but also applied here. And Sue, I think you're a testament to doing this stuff on the ground. You're making this stuff happen. Community wealth building is happening here now through the work that you're doing at Tanghall Smart and Tanghall Employment. I'm going to use that as a bit of a kind of juncture, if you like, to come to the audience really and ask if anybody's got any questions specifically. I'm going to go to that hand first, and then we'll probably do two at a time, and then I'll come back round. Okay, thank you. To you in a second.
Thank you. I'd like to ask where public services that are now being run for private profit, where they fit into all this. You know, you mentioned hospital trusts, but you also mentioned Nybevan in Tredegar, and the dreadful state now of social care, which I gather is really being run for the benefit of these private equity firms at the other end of the planet. And how does community wealth building address the issue that came up in the first talk about Rowntree saying economies should be for public good? And all we're getting now is we have to rearm, we have to build up the military industry, and that is part of North Yorkshire definitely, and Yorkshire in general, rather than treating climate and biodiversity breakdown as the far more serious emergencies that I think they are.
Thank you for that. We'll have just one more question here, and then we'll tackle them too, and then we're going to come there next. Thank you. Sorry, I'll keep you on your toe. Thanks for your question.
Thanks very much. Really stimulating comments from everyone on the panel. I wanted to ask about the relationship between community wealth building and infrastructure projects, particularly where large amounts of national funding is required. Few people would disagree that we could do with better communications, with better access to the grid and so on. Is community wealth building always going to be antagonistic to national infrastructure projects, or is there simply a community wealth building way of doing it?
Thank you very much for those two questions. So who wants to tackle the first one? We were talking in terms of public services, privatisation, also the ecological crisis as well. Who would like to
I'm going to pick off, I pick off a fragment of it?
We'll come to that one in a second as well.
Just based on work Claire's have been doing. Yeah, we've been doing, you might have seen, based on what you said, the work that we've been doing around extraction through social care. There's a really interesting report online that we've looked at various combined authority areas in the UK and looking at the millions leaving our shores and a provision of services that are really no good for those people who need those services, but also the people who are delivering those services. I'm based in Wales, here in Tredegar, that's where my great-grandfather was a miner as well. But hearing about, in Wales, we have the architecture of a Social Services and Wellbeing Act, a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, groundbreaking, world-leading in terms of what they're asking from a policy perspective. There is a section in that act that talks about doing business with people like Sue. It says you, as commissioners, will go out and buy your services from these type of social economy co-op type organisations. We're just doing a piece now with learning disability supported living sector. Traditionally, a third sector place to deliver services. What we're seeing is a graph of private sector, big companies coming in, winning contracts because those traditional relationships that sort of helped in design services, commission services around user need and voice and control has gone. Those relationships have now become transactional. We're relying on procurement processes where your little social enterprise ain't winning. You know, and what we're seeing is this vast growth of these big organisations delivering services, not always very well, and the monies are being shipped further and further away from Wales or from a city like York. That's definitely what we're seeing, and it's heart-wrenching when you see it, especially if you've been through that care system and you have a person needing care and you've had to fight for that to happen. So I think that it's opening eyes around how we need to maybe take some steps back in terms of how we are designing and commissioning and procuring those services. So that's one very little bit of all the points you raised, but I think, you know, for me, there is something that's been unpicked. Energy is another area. There is another, I think we've called the report blowing away. If you look at wind farms in Scotland and where the money's actually going from those. So really, really worth a look at of some of that work that's happening. And I'm going to hand over to the rest of the esteemed panel now.
And just specifically as well for the panel on the question around, is there a kind of community wealth building approach to the delivery of infrastructure projects and regeneration, perhaps? Does anyone want to pick that one up specifically?
Yeah, I will have a go, and I'll touch on the first issue as well. A big part of community wealth building is insourcing. So if you look at, say, Islington Council, they've insourced, I think, £320 million of services back into the local authority. So there's a lot of that happening. In terms of infrastructure, you are seeing, I think, government moving more towards buying from local companies and things like that, but it needs to go a lot further. We need to look at how we can get, you know, union recognition in there, how we can get pay differentials through procurement, but also support these alternative business models, because there's lots of extraction and exploitation, especially in less well-off communities, and anchor institutions and public infrastructure projects, they could potentially create jobs and procure for businesses where there's a big gap, where there's not a local business to provide it, and it would ultimately be provided by a corporation that may not, as you said, treat people very well. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. Sadly, Sarah's got to sprint for a train back to Wales, so unfortunately we'll have to say goodbye to Sarah, but thanks so much for all of your contribution to today and the Commission as well. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. We're going to go back to some more questions if anyone. We'll start over here first, and then let's go for three. Let's do it, and then we'll go here and then there. The first three. Thanks. First.
Hi guys. My question is a kind of a two-parter. I love living in York and been around the social economy stuff for a few years now, and York's not short of ideas. York is not short of innovation, and for me, looking at community wealth building, there are three things that sometimes get in the way. It's like you either lack innovation, or there are issues to scaling or to integration. Coming from the Preston model and your reflections on the Commission, the report that's coming out, how do we de-risk integration and how do we de-risk scale to ensure that those innovations actually get to the places that they need to be in the York model? I'd love to hear your experiences on that and what are those things that we need to be thinking about. And the second one is, it's about story, it's about voice. Who are the people that are missing from this conversation in York that we need to be bringing into the fold, and how do we participate in those stories? Because I think when you look at Emilia-Romagna or the Basque region, there's a moral imagination that carried them to the scale, particularly with Preston. How do we do that in York as well? Thank you.
Thank you. They're two great. What we'll do is let's tackle them, and then we're going to come to these two after that. Just so anybody want to come in on the first point? So I'd really like to get your perspective on the second point, just in terms of who needs to be in that conversation, who needs to be making this happen. Are you happy tackling that first?
You're going to ask me.
I'll put you on the spot.
Someone that specifically said I'm not a talker, and I prefer to do
Come on,
things.
Sue, let's get
You're asking me anyway. Oh gosh. Well, okay, all the voices. So, I like this. I'm really into kind of voices from the margins and people with lived experience. Certainly, kind of whatever the issue is. So, if we're looking at kind of health, to take a point that was said earlier, kind of the health service, people that have been on the end of receive the services, people that are kind of working there on the ground. I mean, it would be lovely, you know, to consult with all sorts of people that have all sorts of perspectives. I'm sure that's going to happen. You know, I'm sure it does happen. I prefer to just do, I have to be honest. You know, I'm really interested in listening to what people have got to say. One-to-one conversations, lots of them, they're really good, I love them. But I actually don't know. I think there's lots of people with good things to say. Whether they're the people that move things forward, I don't know. Because I think it's so seductive to talk about things and to come up with plans. And sometimes what can happen is you devote your attentions and your energies to that, and then stuff doesn't get done. You know, and maybe I'm older, maybe a lot of people in here, I don't know. But, you know, time's ticking on, and I want to get stuff done. You know, I actually enjoy doing stuff and translating thoughts and ideas into action, and then maybe thinking about it and evaluating it and talking with other people. But I don't know, it's a good question. Who else should be included? But I'd like to limit the amount of time that the talks go on before there's some concrete actions. Or maybe alongside you've got talk and action, both going on together, that wonderful praxis thing, kind of. I don't know, but probably wasn't the right person to ask, because I'd kind of hitched my star to, I don't like talking about it.
I thought you answered it brilliantly.
Yeah.
Genuinely. Anybody else want to come back on that question specifically? Martin, can I pull you into that one?
Gosh, I don't know if I've got an awful lot to say on that. But I mean, let me just, I mean, I think in a way that question as well about kind of story and public, you know, the sense of like there being a different set of possibilities is very important. And I think we've often ended up kind of having very low expectations of different aspects of the economy, or we think that the way things are done are just sort of the done thing, and that can't be changed. So, you know, if you think about the risks, I mean, we've heard a lot about why York has got a lot of the elements that might be really propitious for like a very effective push, and the broader York and North Yorkshire region for a really successful push on community wealth building. So what are the risks? Like, why might it not go as well as we'd hope? So I think on the one hand, there's always a risk about dilution, right? There's a risk that the language of community wealth building just becomes a sort of rhetorical trope that gets used by local authorities, or something that, you know, particular institutions like to, you know, say, oh, well, look, we're doing this. You know, isn't this good for our kind of our public standing that we're involved with community wealth building? Whereas I think to do it seriously, it's about doing all of the different aspects of those different kinds of, like looking at the different levers, the different pillars, the different, you know, thinking about employment, thinking about procurement, thinking about land, thinking about finance, thinking about all the different elements together, because it's when you've got everything working in alignment that there's the real hope for getting something that starts to look like a transformation of how that economy is functioning, and not just a kind of a marginal thing. So I think connected with that, you know, whoever we are, whether we're, you know, someone working for maybe an anchor institution, you know, if we're an employee of a hospital or a university or a college or some other kind of large institution here, whether we're someone who's got an engagement with local politics, whether we're just a citizen of the city or the region, we ought to kind of be able to have a real demand that we want this kind of change. And I think it's only really if we hold to account. I mean, Sarah was talking about, you know, in the first instance here, there's a lot of responsibility now that lands with David Scaife as the mayor of the combined authority, about how, you know, when this when the Commission's report is published next month, is this something that is really going to get picked up and run with seriously? And I think, you know, whatever position we're in, whatever institutions we're members of, we really need to keep pressure up on, you know, those who are in positions of power there to really take this seriously. And I think, you know, I'm interested in the ideas that everyone here might have about how that general change of culture, and how that heightening of expectations from everyone and wanting to, you know, feeling like we can expect more of our institutions, how that really is something that we can realise, because I think that's a precondition for then really forcing those who have the existing positions of power within those institutions to kind of move them forward.
Thank you, Martin. We'll come to these questions now, please, just at the front, and then, we'll go to the back first, and then we'll come to you next. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, and it's really exciting ideas here. And I was just thinking, I mean, I've been to several of the Festival Idea events, and I think you've succeeded in getting a younger audience here, which is fantastic on average. But many of the audiences, of course, are of older people who maybe have wealth. And I wonder to what extent you are mapping wealth here and thinking about how that could be used. I mean, I'm just aware that I've been really interested in community energy. I've put small investments into maybe 20 in different parts of the country. There is no opportunity that I can see at the moment for putting any of my spare money, which isn't huge, but it's, you know, it could make a difference, into anything that could be useful for either on community energy projects or other initiatives here. And I just wondered, I mean, Matthew was talking about a bank, which sounds really interesting. Are there any ideas coming out of this commission, which I've not really heard about, which might be thinking about how local people could support the local economy through investment?
Thank you very much. That was a great question. We'll come to that in a second, and also at the front here. Thank you.
Hi. Sarah mentioned the I Can project in Birmingham about getting people into work, and I'm just wondering how community wealth building could support welfare reform.
Super. On those two great questions, does anybody want to start on one of those? Matthew?
Yeah, brilliant question. I think it's about trying to have a change of culture, isn't it? I mean, what I would say before I answer the question, myself and Martin speak a lot about how this needs to be brought to scale everywhere, community wealth building, because nobody heard of it 15 years ago. There's been a good conversation, there's been good things happening in various places, but we need it to be brought to scale. It needs to be the main way of doing things in terms of economic development. In terms of your specific question, what I would say is obviously you may be a member of a pension fund, you can invest that, ask them to invest, not in a international corporation, invest a little more directly in the community where this wealth comes from, say in social housing and renewable energy, and in ethical investment as well. There's also where you put your own money. You can move your money away from a shareholder-owned bank to a building society, credit union, and we're establishing a bank in the northwest of England. So if you're in the northwest, move to the Northwest Mutual soon. And then additionally, as he said, things like community energy. I mean, you can invest in that as well. So, you know, I think people who might be a little older and have a bit more money, not every older person is well off as we know, but those who have done reasonably well, they can get involved in this. And then obviously, I think also job opportunities. I think there's a real issue around people who are 50 or 60 over who want to continue working, and conventional employers don't want them, you know. So I think a lot through recruitment, procurement and other things that can do that. And I think the good thing about being retired is you've got a lot more time to be freed up to do a lot of these things. A lot of people involved in Preston are people who are retired and really getting behind our community wealth building agenda.
And anybody want to pick up the specific point around welfare reform? The only thing I was going to add, not that I'm a panellist, is I've seen, and I work closely with Sue, with the York Social Enterprise Coalition, is, and you mentioned it, Sue, ways that social enterprises can work together in fulfilling contracts and work that tries to, I suppose it gives the opportunity to grow the social enterprise sector. It provides literal services. It's focused on prevention of things, you know, whether that's in social care or other things. So I don't know if you've got any specific insights on that. So I mean, I know it's slightly different to your question, but anything in terms of the homelessness work or anything that's kind of shown a community wealth building approach, for want of a better term, that's actually really offered a different way in which we can approach delivery of public services or specifically welfare.
Thank you. Yeah, so I've tried this a couple of times. So it's first with homelessness and the other with employability. So with homelessness, it's something my own company has supported in since we started, but it's always been a smaller strand. But if it were combined with many other organisations, other third sector organisations, charities and social enterprises, we could have a very kind of a deep and a wide impact. And at the moment, there is a bid. We put a bid in ending homelessness in communities. It's a collaborative bid. And I noted a couple of organisations actually in the room for part of this bid. And the idea is, if we get this, we've got some money, and then we would become the provider in York. The referral pipeline would come to us. We'd work with about 200 clients who at the moment don't have any support. So they move into their first home, or they move out of a hostel into kind of a shared kind of environment, and the support stops, housing first support stops. We have an alternative model, but it relies on collaboration and everybody pulling together. So we've got a grant in, a bid in, because the way I like to do it is you start with a bit of grant, you kind of test and develop, and then whilst you're doing that, you're finding how to make that sustainable in the future. And there are ideas within that project about how to make that into a more sustainable model and not reliant on grants in the future. So there's one area that we've done it. So at the moment, nothing exists. There is not a provider, there's not a service there for that particular gap. However, we've got a collaborative model. Now, we might not get the grant, and I'm kind of working kind of a feel that we need to have a go at doing it anyway, even if we don't get the grant. And I noticed, I can see at the back, she's Astrid and Miles, they started off, they kind of got a third sector organisation themselves, kind of mapping the resources. And the idea is there's a lot of people already doing stuff, but if you join them up, you kind of create a much bigger service product than if people aren't joined up and they're duplicating or they're not known. You don't even know that they're there doing their stuff. So there's this whole big project going on of trying to map services, and just in the example of this what I'm giving, to make it something more than it is, get something at the station, get a structure there, so that anybody turning up at York Station who's homeless is immediately, there's like they know where to go. So that's the project. That we'll do that aspect of it anyway, even if we don't get the grant. Because where there's a will, once there's a plan, it's like, oh, well, we'll have to do it now because there's a plan. But I think it is possible to create things in the gaps that our public sector is failing to offer, not through a lack of will, but a lack of money. I think it's possible to do it. And to find new ways of doing it, which come out of a collaborative ethos, but also trying to be very careful with money. Also remembering that there's ways of getting kind of people resource there that may be cheaper. So we've also got a training plan to train up people with lived experience of homelessness. At the moment, they may not have any job whatsoever, but they probably have quite a lot of talent and experience, but with support and training, could actually be key workers themselves, support workers. So we're going to be running qualifications for them to have, accredited kind of training at the end of the year. This is something we can just go on and do. It doesn't cost much money, because the will's there. And it's not just me, other organisations too, that third sector organisations, but it involves that people just recognising, oh, there's a gap there. Oh, well, we could get some grant funding for it. Let's try. Oh, but while we're waiting this half a year or 2 years for something to actually be given to us, let's see what we can do anyway. And when we start doing it, let's see how that evolves. And who knows, the idea of investment, that blew my mind a little bit. I hadn't actually thought about that individual people may be like benevolent enough to actually want to invest in like kind of new ventures, things to benefit the city. Actually, I admit that I'm going to have a think about that. Hadn't thought about it up to now. It'd all been kind of, oh, do I go to the private sector and get them to sponsor us? No, because then it's their thing and then they'll dictate it. Or I know there's no money in the public sector. There's no point in asking for help from the council for these different things because the money's not there. So therefore, where is the money? Oh, well, maybe that's where some of the money is. But in the meantime, it's through human labour, human endeavour, and just joining up together and just thinking, right, we're going to do this thing, get it done, and let's see where this takes us. And in the meantime, we're shining up human resource. There's more and more of it because people that weren't functioning in the past are now becoming adults with a sense of purpose, and their ideas are like kind of clicking with other people's, and you see stuff happen. That's what I did in my own organisation, and I'd love to do that in other areas. Well, I'm doing that in other areas in a kind of a small first step kind of way. But watch this space. 5 years' time, I'll come back and tell you, these things have happened. It'll be good.
Thank you. Thanks, Sue. That was brilliant. Specifically on the point about community energy, I am aware of York Community Energy that's established that and I'm sure others in the room are more familiar with that. You know, I think just to kind of, we're running out of time here, we're in the last couple of minutes. Just 2 points, I suppose, and linked to the point about Roundtree, which I've always found motivational running a business here that's socially minded, is that the profits, and I know this was mentioned in the previous session, it'll be a duplication for those that have been here for that, the profits that Roundtree made were not considered private profit in their entirety at all. Partly it was considered a profit for the city of York that should be used to be reinvested back in. And I do think there's a mindset shift. We have a lot of conversations, Sue and I work quite closely, around we ultimately want every business to be a social enterprise. We want every business to be passionate about reinvesting profit, to be hiring people who are maybe marginalised or disadvantaged, and showing and setting up businesses that actually directly involve the people that work within them. That shouldn't be an aspirational thing, and any business can do that. And you know, the conversation on profit can sometimes be considered a dirty word, but actually if that's surplus that can then be reinvested to provide impact, then that's the sustainability that will allow, I think, some of this stuff to really grow and move forward. Just to kind of finish off, I mean, thanks so much for everybody's time coming today. The Commission report, as Sarah alluded to, will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. Now, as discussed, that's got a range of recommendations, 15 recommendations, and hopefully, you know, a lot of Matthew's insight and time coming across from the Northwest, you know, has been useful for you, but also for the Commission to be able to put forward some really deliverable but meaningful recommendations. I think it's, you know, it will, though, come down to the fact that we have to demand, I think, politicians on one level to deliver and take this seriously, and not just, you know, there's elements of the recommendations that I think is useful, but it's not everything. I wouldn't have said, you know, we've seen drafts of it. I think there's other things as a city and as a region, transport being one of them, of issues that we need to demand more on that we currently have. And I think the other point, which I'll finish on, is around Sue and what you said around action. I think, sorry, go on, Helen, sorry. Yes, I will mention that. Thank you. Sorry, second to last point. I think my only criticism of York is I think that we're blessed to have a lot of people that are very engaged in conversations, which runs at the risk of us talking about a lot of good ideas and not always putting them into practice. And while I absolutely love the festival ideas, you know, what I really want is it to inspire a festival, or not necessarily a festival, but of action, where we're taking this forward and we're putting that into something. You know, we don't want to turn up every 12 months, talk about great ideas and then come back again. You know, I think we've got to use that forward. One thing which Helen, who is another great colleague of mine, we have been through, this has been partly funded through the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and the Combined Authority, funded a podcast series through a new organisation called Fieldwork. They're online, if you type in Fieldwork York. Has been really speaking to people across York, predominantly, and North Yorkshire, around why community wealth building is important, what it actually means, where it's been applied in practice. So not just theoretical stuff, but real stuff, real examples. So please check that out and share your feedback, good or bad. It's all, I think it's great to have different opinion, even if there's criticism. I think, you know, we've got to work together and we've got to find a way of driving forward together. So on that basis, I will thank very much Matthew Brown, Martin O'Neill and Sue Williamson, and obviously Sarah Evans, who's gone already, and also Yahala Matam CIC for providing the food, Joseph Rowntree Foundation for supporting this event, obviously the venue itself, and of course the Festival of Ideas for not obviously this event on its own, but the whole festival that now is coming to a close. So thanks so much to everybody for supporting it for the last few weeks.